She refused to move a single inch. Her body remained perfectly still, even as the wooden chair shattered into pieces against the nearby wall. The polished steel of the switchblade felt cold against her skin, a sharp promise resting just beneath her jaw. Its handle was made of mother of pearl. While the last few customers in the bar frantically pushed their way toward the doors, Martina Lori did not even blink. She just stood there, holding a tray of dirty glasses with perfect balance. Her expression was bored, as if she had watched this same tired scene play out 1,000 times before. The man with the blade was Aloisio Toscano. He was known as the Iron Don of the East Coast, a ruthless figure who had wiped out entire families before finishing his morning coffee. He wanted her to cry out in fear. He expected her to be shaking uncontrollably, but instead, she simply looked him in the eye. Her gaze held a chill that could make a winter storm feel like a summer breeze. She adjusted her footing, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and then spoke. She whispered just 4 words. Those 4 words would define her. They would prove she was either the most courageous woman in all of New Jersey or the most foolish. Don't dare me. Before we go any further into this unbelievable event, I have to admit that this moment gives me absolute chills. Imagine it. A simple waitress facing down the most feared man in the city. If your heart is pounding just like mine is, please take a moment to click that subscribe button. I would also love it if you told me in the comments where you are joining from. Are you on Team Martina already? I am so proud to be building this amazing group of people who love hearing about strong women. Women who simply will not be made into victims. So let us find out together exactly why Martina spoke those incredibly dangerous words. This is a story about a woman who discovered that true strength is not about hiding from your past, but about choosing when to step out of the shadows. It is a powerful reminder that the person you were trained to be does not have to be the person you become. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop running and finally stand your ground. Now, it is time to get to know the rusty anchor. The thick fog that rolled in from the Hudson River offered no comfort at all. It was a heavy blanket that only made the smell of decay in the air impossible to ignore. The clock showed 1:47 in the morning on a Thursday. The rusty anchor, a rundown bar squeezed between a pawn shop and a fish factory on the Jersey docks, was nearly empty. Only a few lost souls remained. The neon Budweiser sign in the front window was broken, flickering a desperate message to anyone who saw it. Get out now. Martina Lori was wiping down the sticky bar for what felt like the 100th time during her long shift. She was only 24 years old, but she carried a deep exhaustion that felt like it had settled into her very bones. Her eyes had seen her whole world turn to ash, and her hands were skilled at making problems vanish. She was not looking for trouble anymore. All she wanted was to be invisible. She was trying to earn enough money to help her sister Sophia move far away. Maybe, if she was lucky, she could finally get one complete night of sleep without her old training taking over her dreams. But chaos has a way of finding people who were once soldiers. The front door didn't just open, it made an announcement. The hinges screamed like a man giving a final confession, and the air inside the bar instantly became 5 degrees colder. 4 men stepped inside. 3 of the men stood on the sides, creating a protective formation. They were built like stone and wore expensive coats. Their eyes scanned the room constantly, assessing every possible threat as naturally as if they were just breathing air. But it was the man standing in the middle who seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. It was Aloisio Toscano. Even Martina, who had dedicated the last 3 years of her life to knowing absolutely nothing about anyone, knew that face. He had the features of an aristocrat, as if carved from fine Italian marble. His eyes were the color of dried blood, and he wore a charcoal suit that was worth more than every bottle of liquor in the entire bar. He did not simply walk across the floor. He moved with an authority that claimed each footstep as newly conquered land. He was the leader of the Tuscano syndicate, and he was in the middle of a brutal war for control. That war had transformed the entire eastern seaboard into a violent game board, stained completely red. He picked the booth in the far corner. It was the best seat, offering a clear view of both the front and back exits. His two main enforcers, a man named Dante and another named Enzo, took up positions near the dartboard and the old jukebox. Martina let out a slow breath through her nose. She pushed a stray piece of dark hair out of her face and picked up a clean rag and a stained menu. She did not hurry toward him, but she did not hesitate either. "Menu," she said, her voice flat. She dropped it on the table, its scarred surface telling a long history. "We have whiskey," she continued, "and we have cheaper whiskey. We also have beer that tastes like it came from the river. The kitchen has been closed for an hour. It is your choice." Alessio finally looked up from his phone. He stopped for a second, genuinely surprised by her tone. Normally, people could barely speak around him. Usually, the bar's owner, a perpetually nervous man named Mickey, would appear out of nowhere, stammering apologies and offering free drinks on the house. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Aloisio finally asked. His voice was as smooth as expensive liquor, but it carried the sharp edge of a hidden razor blade. "I know you are in my section, which means you are my customer," Martina answered back, her voice perfectly steady. "So what will you drink?" Aloisio observed her with the intense concentration of a man who had built a criminal empire by expertly reading people. He saw no fear in her eyes, no shaking in her hands. All he detected was a profound weariness and a slight hint of annoyance, as if he were just another annoying customer who was not going to leave a good tip. Martina's hands went through the motions automatically, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey while her thoughts traveled to another place, another time. She was a little girl of 12 again. She was standing in her father's office back in Providence, learning how to take apart and reassemble a Glock pistol before she had even learned basic algebra. Her father, Vincenzo Laurier, was not raising a daughter. He was crafting a human weapon. Again, he had ordered, without even looking up from his newspaper. "Do it faster." Her small fingers had trembled with the effort, but after a while, they stopped shaking. Her training had been constant and unforgiving. She learned brutal hand-to-hand combat techniques that were cleverly disguised as ballroom dancing lessons. She learned tactical strategy that was cleverly hidden within simple games of chess. She was taught surveillance methods by practicing people watching at crowded outdoor cafes. By the time she was 16 years old, Martina could vanish into any crowd without a trace. She could analyze an entire room in just 3 seconds, and she knew how to break a man's wrist in 2 simple moves. She was created to be her father's secret weapon, his ultimate insurance policy against the rival families who were always circling them like hungry sharks. But then the fire happened. Even now, she could sometimes smell it in her dreams. The sickening scent of gasoline and burning wood, the smell of her mother's favorite perfume turning into thick, black smoke. The rival Calibri family had sent a very clear message that terrible night, and they had painted it in huge flames across the front of their beautiful home on Federal Hill. Martina only managed to survive because her father had pushed her out of a small window in the basement. His final words to her were not, "I love you." Instead, he had screamed, "Run!" and become no one. She had crawled away into the cold November rain, forced to watch her entire world burn down and collapse into nothing but smoldering embers. In that moment, she made a solemn vow to herself. The girl who knew 30 different ways to kill a man had died in that fire. Only her ghost managed to walk away from the destruction. For the next 3 years, she lived in the shadows of New Jersey's forgotten towns. She worked as a waitress in Neptune. She cleared dirty tables in Hoboken. She cleaned filthy motel rooms in Atlantic City. She changed the color of her hair. She developed a slight limp to throw people off. She started wearing clothes that were 2 sizes too large for her frame. She slowly became invisible, just another forgotten woman working double shifts, completely unremarkable and easy to overlook, just like the fog. The rusty anchor was meant to be the very last stop before she vanished for good. She had saved nearly enough money to move her sister Sophia all the way to Portland. She planned to buy them both brand new identities and a quiet life, where their violent past would remain forever buried. Martina placed the 3 glasses of whiskey on Aloysio's table. For a brief second, she saw her own reflection in the dark amber liquid. But in that reflection, she also saw her father's eyes looking back at her. They were filled with disappointment that she had chosen to survive instead of seeking revenge, that she had abandoned his dark legacy. "Is there anything else?" she asked Aloysio, her voice deliberately empty of any emotion. But even as she spoke the words, she could feel all of her old training surging back to life. She had already made a mental list of all his men's weapons. She had identified every possible escape route from the building. She had calculated all the angles for a potential fight. After 3 long years of pretending to be dead, her father's brutal training was still there, pulsing just beneath her skin like a second heartbeat that she could never truly escape. The ghost inside her was getting tired of being a ghost. Aloysio returned to the bar 3 nights later. He came completely alone this time. This was either an extreme display of power or a foolish death wish. Martina was busy refilling the large ice bin behind the bar when the door creaked open. It was exactly 2:13 in the morning. It was long after last call. It was after Mickey, the owner, had already gone home drunk. It was after the thick fog had transformed the docks into a scene from a terrifying ghost story. "We are closed," she said clearly, without even bothering to turn and face him. "The sign on your door says you are open 24 hours. His voice was sharp and clean, cutting through the stale air of the empty bar like expensive cologne in a room full of diesel fumes. "That sign has been broken since 2019, Martina replied. She finally stood up straight, the metal ice scoop still clutched tightly in her hand. "What is it that you want, Mr. Toscano?" He chose a seat at the bar this time, not the corner booth. This was much closer, much more personal. He was wearing a different suit, but it was just as perfect as the last one. It was a dark navy this time, and his tie was probably worth more than her entire car. "I am here to offer you a job." A short, harsh laugh escaped Martina's lips. It held no humor. "I already have a job, thanks. The tips are awful, but at least nobody is trying to pull me into the world of organized crime. I am not trying to recruit you into my organization," Aloysio clarified. He placed his hands flat on the bar, and for the first time, she saw that his knuckles were covered in old scars, a stark contrast to his perfectly manicured nails. "I am offering you a position as a consultant. You would perform security assessments for me. I will pay you $20,000 a month, in cash." She knew she should have refused him right away. She should have told him to get out, called the police, and then run as far away as she could. But instead, she was shocked to hear herself ask a simple question. "Why me?" Because 4 nights ago, while my men were busy looking for external threats. You noticed the spotter positioned across the street before any of them did. He tilted his head just slightly, his eyes studying her. You immediately scanned the exit routes. You correctly identified the concealed weapons on two of my personal bodyguards, and you positioned yourself behind the bar with perfect lines of sight to both the kitchen and the front door. That is not the instinct of a waitress. That is the result of serious training. The blood in Martina's veins turned to ice. She had worked so hard to be careful, to remain completely invisible for so many years. I have no idea what you are talking about. Martina Lori, he said, his voice calm and steady. You are the daughter of Vincenzo Lori, who was the former consigliere to the Marchetti family. You were presumed to be dead after the Federal Hill fire in 2021. Aloysio's gaze was cold and analytical. You have successfully been a ghost for 3 years. That is very impressive, but I do not need another person who knows how to kill. I have more than enough of those already. I need someone who can see the things that other people miss. I need someone with a steady pulse. When everyone else around them is starting to panic, she gripped the ice scoop so tightly that her knuckles turned white and it began to hurt. And if I refuse your offer, then you will continue to pour drinks in this miserable place, and you will spend the rest of your very short life constantly looking over your shoulder. He pushed a small, disposable burner phone across the smooth surface of the bar. The Calibri family has recently expanded their operations into New Jersey. They are going to find you, sooner or later. The only real question is whether you want to face them as a tired waitress or as someone who has the full protection of the Iron Dawn. The small phone sat on the bar between them like a fully loaded gun. Martina stared at that burner phone for 2 entire days before she finally worked up the courage to make the call. Aloysio's instructions had been incredibly simple. He told her to meet him at Carbone's. It was a fancy Italian restaurant in New York City where powerful politicians would eat pasta and deliberately pretend not to notice the dangerous mobsters sitting just 2 tables away from them. She made sure to arrive 20 minutes early. She was wearing the only dress she owned that did not smell like the deep fryer from the bar. The moment she walked in, she felt an overwhelming urge to turn around and leave. The massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling were probably worth more than her entire yearly income. She knew she did not belong in a place like this. She was surrounded by crisp white tablecloths and wine lists that were thicker than the lease agreement for her tiny apartment. Aloisio was already at his table, with his men standing on either side of him. Dante and Enzo were shadows flanking the throne where their king sat. When Martina entered, Aloisio rose to his feet, a clear sign of respect that felt entirely out of place. He recognized her instantly, saw the dignified grace of a forgotten era clinging to the sharp edges of a modern, violent world. He gestured to the empty chair positioned directly across from his own, an invitation into the lion's den. You finally came. His voice was low and resonant. I am here to personally decline your offer, Martina responded, the lie sliding from her lips as smoothly as she slid into the offered seat. But even as she spoke, her mind was already at work, her eyes a finely tuned instrument of observation. She was mapping the entire room, a skill her father had not taught but had brutally conditioned into her very being, a reflex faster than thought. Her gaze swept over a couple at table 4, their soft smiles and shared dessert screaming anniversary celebration. At the bar, a businessman nursed his 3rd expensive drink, the pale skin on his ring finger telling a story of recent separation. She noted a waiter standing near the kitchen, his rigid posture and economy of movement betraying a military past. Aloysio's own muscle was obvious, with two men guarding the main entrance and another posted strategically by the restrooms, and then her eyes locked onto the anomaly. At table 7, tucked away in the corner, sat a man in a navy jacket. He held a newspaper far too high, a flimsy shield in a room of glass. He had not turned a single page in over 6 long minutes. Martina focused on the distorted image of Aloisio, reflected in a pyramid of stacked wine glasses on a nearby table. Her heartbeat remained steady, a calm sea over a deadly current. No hint of alarm touched her features, a mask of indifference perfected over years of practice. The only sign of tension was a nearly imperceptible movement. Her hand drifted to her glass of water, tilting it just a fraction of an inch to adjust her view of the room's reflection. "You have company," she stated, her voice barely a whisper, as she brought the glass to her lips for a sip. "He is in a navy jacket and wearing brown shoes. I would bet my life he is armed, and he is without a doubt some form of surveillance. The man has been staring at the exact same page of that newspaper since the moment I stepped through the door." Alerted, Dante's hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his jacket, a motion to draw his weapon. Aloisio, however, stopped him cold. He used a gesture so small, so fleeting, that if Martina had not been watching his every micro-expression, she would have missed it completely. "Are you certain?" Aloisio asked. His tone was utterly conversational, as if he were merely commenting on the evening's pleasant weather, a calm that was far more unnerving than any shout. "Check his reflection," she advised quietly. "Look in the glass pyramid just behind you. He has been here for a considerable amount of time and has not glanced at his phone even once. In this day and age, nobody sits alone in a restaurant for 30 minutes without compulsively checking their phone, unless they are on the clock and working a job." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Aloisio's face then, the kind that showed teeth, sharp and predatory. He made another tiny, almost invisible gesture with his hand. In an instant, Enzo stood up from his post. He walked a meandering path that took him directly past table 7, where he pretended to stumble, bumping the man's chair with calculated carelessness. The man's hand immediately shot to his waistband, a trained, reflexive action to check his concealed weapon before he could stop himself. Mission accomplished, Enzo straightened up and returned to his position near the door. Aloisio leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Martina. He studied her with a new intensity, as if she were a pawn on a chessboard that had just defied all expectations and captured his queen. "My most trusted men have been by my side for 15 years, Aloisio stated, his voice a low rumble of disbelief and irritation, and yet neither of them spotted him. That is because they were scanning for immediate threats, for guns and aggressive postures," Martina explained, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. "I was not looking for threats. I was looking for patterns, for things that did not belong." She leaned forward slightly. "Waitresses who survive in this world, Proem, learn very quickly to see the customers who are not behaving like actual customers." There was a long silence. "When can you begin your work for me?" he finally asked. The warehouse they met in, located in the industrial heart of Elizabeth, was filled with the smell of rusted metal and secrets that had been buried for decades. Aloisio arrived precisely at dawn. He stepped out of a black town car that was likely worth more than the derelict building itself. He was still wearing $1,000 Italian leather shoes, footwear that looked as if it had never made contact with anything dirtier than polished marble floors. Martina was already there, waiting for him. She was dressed in practical cargo pants and a simple tank top, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional knot. She had already invested an entire week inserting herself into his security team. She had been a ghost, watching his daily routines, memorizing his habits, and methodically identifying every single one of his vulnerabilities. A takeover was imminent. She could sense it in the air, a nervous, electric energy that clung to his highest-ranking underbosses. She could see it clearly in the subtle ways certain soldiers would suddenly find the floor fascinating whenever he looked in their direction. A clear failure of nerve and loyalty. Someone was preparing to make a move on the man they called the Iron Dawn. And when that move came, she knew it would not be a clean, honorable battle. It would be a slaughter. "Take off your jacket," she commanded, her voice cutting through the morning silence. Aloysio's eyebrow arched in surprise and displeasure. "Excuse me?" he asked, his tone laced with cold authority. "Your enemies are not going to send you a formal invitation to a duel at 20 paces," she said bluntly. "They will wait until you are vulnerable. They will corner you in a concrete parking garage or a public bathroom somewhere isolated where your bodyguards cannot possibly get to you in time." She began to circle him like a predator, sizing up its prey. "You must learn how to fight dirty, how to be vicious, when that expensive suit and your reputation can no longer shield you from harm." He hesitated for only a second before he removed his tailored jacket. He folded it with meticulous precision and placed it carefully on a dusty wooden crate. Even in just his shirt sleeves, he carried an aura of command, a man who belonged in a high-stakes boardroom, not a desperate, bloody brawl. "This is your first lesson," Martina said, her voice flat as she moved silently to a position directly behind him. "Imagine someone grabs you from behind in a narrow hallway. Tell me, what is your next move?" "I do not get grabbed," he answered with absolute certainty. "I have men for that." But she was already moving. She locked her forearm around his throat, applying just enough pressure to make her point terrifyingly clear. "You just got grabbed," she hissed in his ear. "Your men are either dead in the hallway or they have been paid to look the other way. It is now just you and this person who wants to watch you suffocate on your own expensive silk tie. So I will ask you again. Now what do you do?" For a brief, tense moment, Aloysio's entire body went rigid. Martina could feel the war raging within him, his immense pride clashing violently with his primal instinct for survival. Then he finally moved, but it was the wrong move. He tried to muscle his way out, relying on the upper body strength that served him well in a controlled gym environment. "No," Martina said, releasing her grip and stepping away from him. "You fight like a gentleman, like someone who learned the rules in a dojo. A real street fight has no honor. It has no technique. It is purely about inflicting so much pain and shock on your attacker that they immediately regret ever laying a hand on you." She then demonstrated the principles, her movements a blur of brutal efficiency. A sharp stomp with her heel to the instep to shatter bone. A hard elbow strike to the solar plexus to steal the breath. A quick jab with her fingers toward the eyes to blind and disorient. Pain, then shock, then escape, always in that specific order. They trained relentlessly for 3 straight hours. She showed him how a simple pin could become a deadly weapon, how to break an attacker's grip by manipulating their joints, and how to turn an ordinary stairwell into a lethal tactical advantage. With each painful lesson, she systematically stripped away the layers of his aristocratic polish, peeling back the veneer of the powerful Dawn to reveal something much more raw and primal underneath. By the time they finished, Aloysio's expensive shirt was untucked and stained with sweat. His knuckles were scraped raw and bleeding, and his perfectly styled hair was a complete mess. He no longer looked like a crime lord who commanded legions from a distance. He looked like a desperate man who had just clawed his way out of the very same gutter his enemies called home, and found he belonged there. Again, he said, his breathing heavy, but his voice completely steady. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Martina's lips. It was possible he might just survive what was coming for him after all. But survival in their brutal world demanded much more than simply learning how to fight like an animal. It required a different kind of strength entirely. If you can already feel the dangerous tension building between these two powerful souls, then you need to prepare yourself, because everything is about to escalate far beyond what you can imagine. The man known as the Iron Dawn has just taken his first lesson in survival from a woman who is practically a ghost. But the truly critical question that remains is this: can a ghost ever learn to place her trust in a monster? You must make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because the events that are about to unfold at the annual charity gala will completely redefine everything you thought you knew about the nature of power and the formation of deadly partnerships. The very next scene will show you exactly why the most lethal and unbreakable alliances are so often forged in the dust and blood of a forgotten warehouse. The gown she wore was the color of a midnight sky, made of a fine silk that certainly cost more than Martina had earned in 6 straight months of serving drinks in a dead-end bar. The dress fit her body as if it had been meticulously crafted just for her, which, of course, for sure, it had. Aloisio was a man who never did anything halfway. She stared at the woman in the full-length mirror of the hotel suite, a stranger with her face, and could barely recognize the person looking back at her. "I look absolutely ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, instinctively tugging at the gown's unfamiliar, plunging neckline. "You look dangerous," Aloisio's voice corrected her from the doorway behind her. He stood there in his complete formal attire, a perfectly tailored tuxedo that made him look like a portrait of old money, and even older, more terrifying sins. And that, he added, is precisely the point of this entire evening. The powerful Baldini family is the host of this charity gala tonight. That means at least half of the most influential East Coast families will be in attendance. They will be circling me all night, like sharks that smell blood in the water, waiting to see if I show any sign of being weak enough to finally be taken down. Martina turned to face him, and the dark blue silk of the dress moved with her, flowing around her legs like liquid shadow. "So, what exactly is my role in all of this? Am I just supposed to be your arm candy for the evening? A beautiful distraction to keep their eyes off you? You are a message," he stated plainly. He crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of her. He reached out and made a small adjustment to the diamond necklace he had provided, a piece on loan that was probably worth more than a small island nation. "You are going to be the woman who stands right next to the Iron Dawn and does not even flinch. Your presence will make them wonder. It will make them ask questions about what you know and what you are truly capable of. It will make them question why I would trust you enough to bring you with me, directly into the lion's den." As he spoke, she could feel the familiar, reassuring weight pressed against her inner thigh. It was the ceramic blade she had insisted on carrying, hidden away in a custom sheath that had been expertly sewn beneath the layers of expensive silk. The dress may have been nothing more than a costume for the part she was playing, but the knife she carried was devastatingly real. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was the physical embodiment of everything Martina despised. Enormous crystal chandeliers dripped light from the ceiling, champagne fountains bubbled endlessly, and the wealthy guests wore their fortunes like suits of impenetrable armor. She saw faces she recognized from Federal Bureau of Investigation wanted posters, now mingling and laughing with state senators and corporate chief executive officers. Everyone in the room was participating in the same grand charade, pretending the blood that stained their money had long since dried and washed away clean. Aloysio's hand rested firmly on the small of her back, a gesture that felt both possessive and protective, but not controlling. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking their every move as they entered, watching them, assessing them, calculating their odds. Antonio Baldini, the head of his family, approached them himself. He was silver-haired and moved with the fluid grace of a serpent, his welcoming smile never once reaching his cold, empty eyes. "Aloisio, my friend, who is this lovely creature you have brought with you tonight?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "This is Martina Lori," Aloisio replied, and as he said her last name, she saw a clear flash of recognition in Baldini's guarded expression. He knew that name. He knew who her father was. "She is my new consultant," Aloisio added. They had to dance because in their world, a refusal would be seen as a sign of disrespect, a weakness. Martina allowed him to lead her through the steps of the waltz on pure muscle memory. Her father's stern voice echoed in her head, a litany of survival rules. Always know where your exits are. Always keep your weapon hand completely free. As they moved across the floor, her eyes never stopped working. She spotted 3 potential threats in the crowd. 2 men had the unmistakable bulge of concealed firearms under their jackets, and one of the catering servers moved with the disciplined, deadly precision of a former Spetsnaz operative. "You are scanning the room," Aloisio murmured, his lips brushing against her ear. "There is someone in this ballroom who wants you dead," she replied quietly. "In fact, there are probably several someones who want you dead. And yet," he countered, "you are still here, dancing with me." Her hand tightened ever so slightly on his shoulder. "A knife cuts in both directions, Don Aloisio." "Have you forgotten that?" His laugh was a low, genuine, and deeply dangerous sound. "That, Martina, is precisely why you are here." The call that shattered her world came at 3 o'clock in the morning, exactly 3 days after the gala. Martina was at the secure, safe house in Hoboken, methodically reviewing hours of security camera footage. Suddenly, her personal phone, the one with a number known by only 2 other living people, buzzed with an incoming video call from a blocked, untraceable number. Her younger sister's face appeared, filling the entire screen. It was Sophia, only 17 years old and utterly terrified. A wide strip of silver duct tape was stretched cruelly across her mouth, and silent tears streamed down her pale cheeks. The background behind her was stark and brutal, bare concrete walls and harsh industrial lighting. It was a basement, or perhaps a tomb. "Hello, Martina," a man's voice said, slick with false warmth. The voice was horribly familiar. It was Carmine Russo, Aloisio's most trusted underboss, the man who had been his second-in-command for the last decade. The camera shifted, panning away from her sister to reveal Carmine's face. He was smiling, a picture of false sympathy that could not hide the raw, naked ambition burning in his eyes. "Or," he continued, "perhaps I should be calling you the ghost of Vincenzo Laurier's daughter." Martina's hand, resting on the table, did not so much as tremble. When she spoke, her voice was unnaturally flat, completely devoid of any emotion. "Where is she?" she asked. "She is somewhere very uncomfortable right now." He answered casually, "But she can walk out of that place completely unharmed on one condition. You must do exactly what I tell you to do." Carmine leaned closer to the camera, his smile widening into a grotesque knife wound of a grin. "Tomorrow night, Aloisio has a private meeting scheduled at the yacht club. It will be very private, with just you and him present for security. You are going to walk in with him, and you are going to put 2 bullets directly into the back of his head. Then you will simply walk away, and your little sister will be delivered safely to whatever new life you have been so desperately planning for the two of you." "Why choose me for this?" she asked, her voice still a monotone. "Because you are close enough to him now that he will never see it coming," he explained patiently. "Because you are skilled enough to completely disappear after the job is done. And," he added, "because you have no other option." As he spoke, he reached out and grabbed Sophia's hair, yanking her head back violently, forcing a muffled whimper of pain from her through the tape. The call ended abruptly, plunging the room back into silence. Martina sat perfectly still in the oppressive darkness for exactly 90 seconds. She allowed the wave of pure panic to wash over her, to crest and then to recede. Then, she drowned what was left of it in ice-cold, methodical calculation. Carmine Russo thought he knew her. He thought she was still that desperate young woman he remembered, slinging drinks in a cheap bar, a person who would be willing to do anything at all to protect her sister. He had made a critical error. He had no idea that she had spent the last 3 grueling years training to become someone else entirely, someone far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. She pulled up the encrypted contact list on her burner phone and found the single number Aloisio had given her, a number to be used for only the most dire of emergencies. He answered the call on the very first ring. "We have a problem," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Carmine Russo has my sister. He wants me to kill you tomorrow night at the yacht club." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then, Aloisio's voice, low and intense, asked the only question that mattered. "Are you going to do it?" "No," Martina replied, without a single moment of hesitation. "But the important thing is, he does not know that. Not yet." A desperate and incredibly dangerous plan was already taking shape inside her head, its framework built from fear and necessity. She looked at Aloisio, her voice low and steady. "How much faith do you have in me? Is it enough to listen to the rest of this insane idea? Because if it is, we are going to give that monster precisely the outcome he is anticipating. We will play our parts perfectly, right up to the very last second, when the script changes completely." The meeting he expected at the yacht club was never real. It was pure misdirection. The actual trap was set 3 miles to the south, deep inside the industrial labyrinth of the Bayonne docks. This was Martina's territory, a place where she had spent 3 long years learning every single shadow, memorizing every forgotten warehouse, and knowing every rusted shipping container that could either conceal a threat or offer a chance at survival. As she knew he would, Carmine swallowed the bait whole, like a predator blinded by hunger. His team had been diligently tracking Martina's burner phone, meticulously logging her every step, and seeing the exact narrative she had carefully constructed for them to follow. They saw a woman on the edge, a subordinate cracking under pressure, preparing to betray her own leader and walk Aloisio directly into an execution. The one thing they failed to see was the second phone, the one secured by military-grade encryption. They never detected the silent network humming with coordination, operating on hidden frequencies they were not equipped to monitor. Just as planned, Martina stood on Pier 19 when the clock struck midnight. She was dressed in her worn-out waitress uniform, a deliberate choice to make her look insignificant and utterly alone beneath the weak, flickering glow of a single street lamp. 50 feet away, cloaked in the oppressive darkness, Aloisio played his part as the dead man walking. His most trusted soldiers, the few that Carmine had failed to turn, were positioned strategically throughout the maze of containers, waiting like silent ghosts in the night. Carmine's arrival was loud and arrogant, a procession of 8 men, their vehicle headlights slicing aggressively through the dense coastal fog. He emerged from his car with a broad smile, radiating a confidence born from a victory he already considered his own. Sophia was violently pushed out of the car after him, her hands still bound, her eyes wide with pure terror. "Smart girl," Carmine's voice boomed across the pier, dripping with condescension. "I had a feeling you would eventually recognize what was truly important. Family always comes first, does it not?" With a steady hand, Martina raised the gun. It was Aloysio's personal weapon, the very firearm she was supposed to use to end his life. "Let her go now." "After I see the proof," Carmine countered. "Show me his body first. Then, and only then, your sister is free to go." This was the critical moment, the single point on which everything would turn. Martina pivoted, aiming the weapon directly into the darkness where she knew Aloysio was waiting, and she pulled the trigger 3 times. The brilliant flash from the muzzle tore through the oppressive blackness of the night. A heavy body crumpled to the ground. Carmine let out a triumphant, ugly laugh. "You see? That was not so difficult, was it?" And then, the entire world exploded in light. Every single floodlight, every spotlight on every container, every high beam on every vehicle that Martina had painstakingly positioned over the last 72 hours blazed to life. In an instant, the docks were transformed into a brilliantly lit stage. Carmine's men were suddenly caught in the open, completely exposed, hopelessly surrounded, and massively outgunned. Aloysio rose to his feet from the spot where he had fallen, casually brushing bits of concrete dust from the shoulder of his expensive jacket. The special effects blood pack, hidden beneath his shirt, had burst with perfect, convincing drama. He offered a smile that was all predator. "The interesting thing about ghosts," Martina said, her gun now aimed squarely at Carmine's chest, "is that we have become experts at playing dead." The entire confrontation was finished in less than 90 seconds. Carmine's men, instantly recognizing they were trapped inside a meticulously designed kill box, threw their weapons to the ground in surrender. The few who hesitated learned a swift and brutal lesson about why you should never back desperate men into a corner on their home ground. Martina quickly walked over to Sophia, sliced through her restraints with a small knife, and held her sister tightly while she wept with relief. Looking over Sophia's trembling shoulder, her gaze locked with Aloysio's. The ghost who had spent years running had finally stopped. Now she was the one who ruled the graveyard. The inescapable problem with cleaning house, however, was that you could never be certain you got everyone. Carmine had a distant cousin connected to the Baldini family, a man named Marco, whose ambition far outstripped his common sense, and who, critically, had access to military-grade chemical agents. He decided to make his move 2 weeks later, during the victory celebration hosted on Aloysio's magnificent yacht, the Fortuna, which was anchored just off the coast of Sandy Hook. Martina noticed it in Marco's eyes a split second before the poisoned champagne could even reach Aloysio's lips. It was a fleeting flash of deep satisfaction, the unmistakable look of a premature and foolish victory. She covered the distance across the deck in 3 powerful strides, her hands striking out to slap the champagne flute from Aloysio's grasp. The delicate crystal shattered on the polished teak deck, its expensive bubbles fizzing and mixing with a clear liquid that carried the faint, telltale scent of bitter almonds. It was a fast-acting cyanide derivative, a substance so lethal it could kill in a matter of minutes. "Get below deck, right now," she commanded Aloysio, her voice leaving no room for argument. At that exact moment, Marco's hand darted inside his suit jacket. 3 other men, his accomplices scattered amongst the celebrating crowd, mirrored his action. They were wolves hiding in plain sight, dressed in expensive designer suits. But Martina's firearm was already in her hand, the barrel aimed directly at Marco's center mass. Do not even think about it. Her voice was sharp and cold, cutting through the festive music and cheerful laughter like a razor blade. Marco just smiled, a thin, cruel expression. You are outnumbered here, waitress. You should count your odds again. Without a word, Dante and Enzo had already slipped into perfect flanking positions, their weapons now trained on Marco's men. Even so, there were still far too many unpredictable factors. Too many innocent civilians caught in the crossfire, and they were surrounded by an endless ocean with absolutely nowhere to escape. The situation needed to end, and it needed to end quickly and quietly. Martina made a decision. She shot out the main deck lights. Overwhelming darkness instantly consumed the entire yacht. She began to move purely on instinct, guided by the 3 years of brutal training her father had forced upon her. It was pure muscle memory, a reaction faster and more precise than conscious thought. The first of Marco's guards went down with a crushed trachea, his collapse both silent and permanent. The second man caught her elbow directly in his temple, and he was rendered unconscious long before his body even hit the deck. Suddenly gunfire erupted, and the night was filled with screaming and absolute chaos. Martina did not fight the chaos. She used it, becoming an unseen part of it. She was a ghost moving through the suffocating blackness. She located Marco as he was desperately trying to make his way to the speedboat. Her knife, the ceramic blade she acquired at the gala, the one that was now always with her, found its home in his kidney. The wound was not immediately fatal, but it was completely incapacitating. "Where is the antidote?" she hissed into his ear. "There is no antidote," he gasped. She applied more pressure, twisting the blade slightly. "Then you will die very slowly." His resolve shattered. He told her everything. It was in his inside jacket pocket, a small blue vial containing an activated charcoal suspension. It was his insurance policy, just in case of an accidental exposure. Martina left him bleeding out on the deck and found Aloisio in the galley. He was already exhibiting the first terrifying symptoms of the poison, including an elevated heart rate and dangerously dilated pupils. She wasted no time, forcing the life-saving antidote down his throat. From that point on, her forgotten nursing training took complete control. She carefully monitored his vital signs, helped regulate his breathing, and fought to keep him conscious while the powerful charcoal worked to absorb the poison from his system. 20 agonizing minutes later, the Coast Guard arrived to a scene of flashing emergency lights and motionless bodies. Aloisio managed to sit up slowly, the color finally starting to return to his face as he looked at Martina, as if he were truly seeing her for the very first time. "You are no longer just my consultant," he said, his voice weak but firm. Martina tensed for a moment, unsure of what came next. "You are my partner." The rusty anchor sign outside the bar looked much smaller than Martina remembered it. 3 entire months had passed since the terrifying night on the yacht, since Marco's failed assassination attempt, since she had finally stopped pretending to be a nobody. The old neon sign continued to flicker its dying, rhythmic message. The front door still groaned like a soul in confession. But now, she viewed the place through entirely new eyes. It was no longer a place to hide, but the site of a new beginning. Mickey was standing behind the bar, habitually wiping down the same deeply scarred wooden counter he must have cleaned 10,000 times before. He looked up as she walked in, then did a visible double take, staring at the confident woman dressed in a perfectly tailored coat and wearing expensive leather boots. "Martina, my God, I honestly thought you were dead, or that you had just vanished. Maybe even went into witness protection." She offered a small, knowing smile as she pulled a thick envelope from her jacket pocket. I am none of the above, Mickey. I am here today to make you a serious offer. The paperwork and the transfer of ownership took less than 20 minutes to complete. Mickey signed every document with hands that trembled, likely contemplating whether or not refusing her offer was even a possibility. It was. Martina had made a promise to herself that she would not become her father. She would not be the monster she had been meticulously trained to become. But the truth was, Mickey was drowning in gambling debts and a lifetime of poor choices, and she was handing him a lifeboat, attached to a sum of money that made his eyes well up with tears. After he was gone, Martina stood by herself in the now empty bar. She ran her hand slowly along the worn surface of the counter, thinking about the woman who had once hidden in this very room, the woman who poured cheap drinks and always kept her head down, foolishly believing that being invisible was the same thing as being safe. The door creaked open again. Aloysius walked in, his eyes scanning the space with the same sharp, analytical gaze he applied to every situation. He had offered to send his lawyers, his team of accountants, and a crew of people to manage the entire transaction for her. She had firmly refused his offer. This was something she absolutely needed to do on her own. Feeling sentimental? He asked, taking a seat at the bar. No, just being practical. Martina reached up and took 2 glasses from the top shelf, pouring them both a measure of expensive whiskey. It was her bar now, and this was her liquor. Sophia is going to need a legitimate business that she can manage while she finishes up her schooling. It would not look right for the sister of the Iron Dawn's new partner to be slinging drinks in some other person's run-down dive bar. And so, the Rusty Anchor will become a respectable front, a private meeting place, and a designated safe house for us. She slid one of the glasses across the counter to him. It will be everything it always was, but now we are just being honest about it. Aloysius raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, and to old ghosts who can finally be at peace. Martina gently clinked her glass against his. She felt the welcome burn of the top-shelf whiskey as it went down. She felt the immense weight of the decisions she had made and fully accepted. Outside, the thick fog began to roll in from the Hudson River, but for the first time in 3 long years, Martina was not trying to disappear into it. She was standing firmly in the light, embracing the fire and all, exactly where she was always meant to be. The girl who had died twice had finally figured out how to truly live. What an absolutely stunning and incredible journey we have just witnessed together. Everyone. Martina has transformed from a person hiding in the darkest shadows to someone standing proudly in the brightest light. She went from serving cheap drinks to serving her own brand of justice. If you love this incredible story of resilience, please show your support and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more amazing tales of survival, redemption, and the most unexpected of alliances. Remember to turn on your notifications so that you never miss a single episode. And now I have to ask all of you, what was your absolute favorite moment in this story? Was it the intense knife scene in the darkness, the meticulous planning of the warehouse trap, or that final, explosive confrontation on the yacht? Please comment below and let us start a discussion. Your interaction and engagement are what make this entire channel possible. Thank you so much for being here with me today. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons to our audience.